Huh? What do Operations Cartwheel, Husky, and Citadel have in common? I don't know. What? They're all being launched in the same 2-week period? What is this, June 1916? Nah, no, I'll talk to you next week. You can do better, okay? Yeah. July 2nd, 1943. The Allies have not made any major land attacks in the South Pacific since the end of the fight for Guadalcanal 4 months ago, but they have been preparing for Operation Cartwheel, a many-staged operation to work their way up the Solomon Islands. And this week, it finally begins with the invasion of New Georgia.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
More taste, smoother on the throat.
Better smoke. Join the Time Ghost Army.
I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, everything seemed to be about preparation. Adolf Hitler set the date for his big summer offensive in the USSR as July 3rd. The Allies set July 10th as the date for the invasion of Sicily, and both the Japanese and Americans were sending men around the Solomons in preparation for future actions. Which, as I said a minute ago, are no longer future. For the New Georgia campaign begins now on the 30th. The Allies land on several New Georgian islands, actually, and all of the landings are pretty successful. The men are mainly from John Hester's 43rd Division and have support from Richmond Turner's Task Force 31 and land-based planes under Aubrey Fitch. Turner, who had led the invasion of Guadalcanal in August 1942 and then was caught flat-footed by the Japanese response, was determined not to be surprised again. So, the night of the 29th, Aaron Merrill's cruiser-destroyer squadron bombard Shortland, the main Japanese naval base in the Solomons. They also lay a bunch of mines in the local waters and even have a support group at sea featuring carriers just in case the Japanese send naval forces from Truk. But the Japanese are caught by surprise the 30th. One of their subs spots the invasion fleet the night of the 29th, but they think that their recent aerial offensive bought them more time to beef up here, and they do not have the force yet to defeat a large-scale invasion. What the Americans want to do is to land at several points and then eventually make a direct attack on Munda. The main landing point is the north coast of Rendova Island, across the channel from the Munda airfield. Rendova was the key since it provided a jumping-off point for an attack on Munda and was an ideal location to emplace artillery to support the attack. There are well under 200 Japanese here, mainly infantry, and they are handled easily. 8 destroyers have set up a smoke screen blocking the coastal guns across the channel, so 6 transports can unload 6,000 men in peace, which they do from the dawn. They're not finished at 11:15 when 27 Zeros make a sweep over the area. 4 are shot down by the American Combat Air Patrol, but this does delay the transports. But anyway, by 3 in the afternoon, they have unloaded and they have left. It is then that they find trouble, though, entering the channel, as 24 Zeros escorting 25 bombers carrying torpedoes arrive. They are intercepted, but 10 of the bombers get through, and one of them hits Turner's flagship Mikołaj with a torpedo. The Japanese lose 19 bombers. Whether or not Mikołaj can be salvaged is a moot point, since in the evening, 2 PT boats mistake it for a Japanese ship, and the 2 more torpedoes they put into it sinks it for good. The PT boats are US Navy, and they've been told there were no friendly forces in the area. Turner transfers his flag to Fahrenheit. Another Japanese air attack this day by over 40 planes fails to harm any shipping. There is also a landing near Wickham Anchorage, where the Japanese defenders number around 300. They put up a fight, but a few days from now, they'll be wiped out. We saw last week that Segi Point was occupied the 21st, and on the 30th, a construction unit arrives to turn it into an emergency airfield. That buildup gets going right away, and already the 28th and 29th, U.S. forces on Karolina and Woodlark Islands begin work on airfield construction. On the 1st, 40 Japanese planes attack the Rendova beachhead and lose 8 of their number while causing no damage. And today comes a combined Japanese Army and Navy airstrike. I know, how often do they get together, right? In a joint operation, 18 army bombers come in without being spotted, and they cause 200 casualties. The naval light cruiser Yubari and 9 destroyers bombard the beachhead, but they only manage to hit the jungle. Today, the Americans want to land on mainland New Georgia. Liana Beach is like 3.5 kilometers from Munda, but it's heavily defended, so they hit Zanana Beach, 5 kilometers to the east. 2 regiments cross in the afternoon and set up a small perimeter. As for the little port of Viru, Marines are ferried from Sigi Point and then set out the 27th overland for it. However, the New Georgia jungle, clinging to the damp hill slopes, proved to be denser, wetter, and far more resistant to military operations than anything encountered on Guadalcanal. More on that next week, but the pace of advance is slow enough that the Marines fall a full day behind schedule. They do manage to take Viru the first, though, after a vicious battle. So that is pretty much what happens the first few days of the campaign. The Japanese, for their part, do decide to send 4,000 more men to hold New Georgia from Rabaul, but that'll happen next week. Elsewhere in the area, on the 30th, McKechnie Force, a mixed unit of Americans and Australians, lands at Nassau Bay near Salamaua. There is immediate heavy fighting to secure their beachhead. Now, these regions I've mentioned are not so scattered and are part of an island securing plan. Carolina and Woodlark Islands are 650 kilometers across the Solomon Sea from New Georgia, and the Nassau Bay landing some 500 kilometers further up the New Guinea coast. The Japanese concluded, just as MacArthur intended they should, that nearby Salamaua was now threatened with imminent attack. Prevented by Allied control of the skies from sending another reinforcement convoy, General Imamura ordered units out of Leh to march the 20 miles south and reinforce the garrison at Salamaua. By doing so, he fell for MacArthur's ploy to siphon off enemy strength from his Leh defenses and lure his troops and supplies southward. One attack set to go off soon that has some deception ploys around it that aren't fooling anyone is Operation Citadel, the German offensive against the Kursk salient. July 1st, Adolf Hitler holds his war conference for the offensive, now scheduled to begin July 5th. A bunch of senior officers want the actual plans to be changed, but they are not, and they call for a double envelopment, as I've discussed over the last few weeks, by Walter Model's 9th Army to the north and Army Group Kempf and Hermann Holtz's 4th Panzer Army to the south. Today, on the 2nd, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin writes to the commanders of the Central, Voronezh, and Steppe fronts. According to information at our disposal, the Germans may go over to the offensive on our front between the 3rd and 6th of July. The Stavka of the Supreme Commander orders 1. Intensification of reconnaissance and observation of the enemy in order to assure timely discovery of his intentions. 2. Ground troops and aircraft to be at readiness to repel possible enemy blow. Thing is, the areas where the Germans are concentrated suddenly go quiet. The nighttime movement of men and material ceases. Further to the south of Kharkov, there is much traffic on the roads to the Donbass. But this suggests Germans leaving the Kursk salient area. German radio also makes a big deal about Erich von Manstein, overall commander of the Southern Pincer, leaving the USSR and going to Bucharest to award Jan Antonescu a Gold Cross. This is deception, of course, but all the signs for weeks have fairly obviously indicated to the Soviets that an attack is to come and where it is to come. In late June, Luftwaffe attacks by both day and night are stepped up. A side note, courtesy of John Erickson, one such night attack hit Central Front Commander Konstantin Rokossovsky's headquarters, but just by chance, he decided to set up his signals group in the officers' mess, so he is unharmed. And Voronezh Front boss Nikolai Vatutin learns now from the pilot of a shot-down Heinkel 111 that fresh German troops are in fact moving up to Kharkov from Crimea. Now, Rokossovsky thinks he can in fact withstand the German onslaught and has several variants of his defense plans for various eventualities. But importantly, once Model is beaten, Joseph Stalin wants his front, together with the Western and Bryansk fronts, to quickly launch Operation Kutuzov, a counteroffensive to liberate the entire Ural salient and destroy the German 9th Army and 2nd Panzer Army. Georgy Zhukov is to be in charge of the interfront planning, and he thinks this is possible. They have a big superiority in all departments, especially air power, over the local enemy, but he thinks the defense to come next week is a critical prerequisite. The main problem for Zhukov was in coordinating superior Soviet resources to achieve decisive results on the battlefield. Model enjoyed the advantage of unity of command and interior lines, whereas Zhukov had great difficulty coordinating the activities of three fronts operations on exterior lines. Model hoped to prevail in a defense of the Oral salient by picking off one opponent at a time, and it was Zhukov's challenge to overwhelm him with simultaneous thrusts. There is also to be a counteroffensive in the south by the Voronezh and steppe fronts, Operation Rumyantsev, which is to destroy the hopefully weakened 4th Panzer Army and open things up for a push to the Dnieper. And Stalin has plans for even further south this week. On the 28th, Stavka Directive 30143 is issued to the North Caucasus Front that gives the basic idea for a new offensive to liberate the Kuban. It pretty much just involves hitting the enemy with overwhelming force around the villages of Gorishny and Novy. At this point, Soviet operational planning in the Kuban was bankrupt of imagination, and a front comprising 400,000 troops had reduced its focus to seizing just a few kilometers of terrain. Despite suffering heavy losses to capture and hold the Malaya Zemlya, Petrov could not figure out how to make use of it. Instead, Petrov intended to just keep battering against the German blue line, content to fight a battle of attrition. The Germans have given up on one battle of attrition, the Battle of the Atlantic, at least for the time being. In the month of June, U-boats now operate mainly west of the Azores against U.S. Gibraltar convoys. They also began sailing in groups across the Bay of Biscay to better fight off air attacks, but this was not successful, and from the middle of the month come orders that they are to always submerge when they're out, unless they're charging their batteries. 17 U-boats are lost this month, and the Allies lose but 20 ships to U-boats. British naval codes are also changed, and that nearly ends the ability of German B-Dienst to intercept British radio messages. The Germans also believe that their own codes are perfectly secure, and they blame any lack of security on spies in French ports and radio direction finding. And that ends the week, with new Allied attacks all over the Solomons achieving a decent amount of success, and Hitler still planning and planning. Oh, and on the 1st, Ion Antonescu visits Benito Mussolini to suggest that Romania and Italy should leave the war together. Well, soon enough, the Italians will be on the defensive, for Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily, is still set to begin July 10th. I'm going to end today by doing something a little different. I'm going to completely break my timeline and talk from hindsight, not about the results of Husky, but about its scale by comparison, because most people fail to realize just what that was. If you do not want to hear anything about future events of the war, then turn this episode off now and wait for it to all unfold in real time. Right. The following is a long quote from James Garvey's Operation Husky. The Allied invasion of Sicily on July 10, 1943, was the largest and most dispersed amphibious assault of the Second World War. It was also the most complex combined operations logistics exercise attempted by the Allies up to that point in the war, with an initial force comprising 176,000 soldiers landing across a 100-mile span. The best way to contextualize the logistical degree of difficulty associated with Operation Husky is to compare it with Operation Overlord, the invasion of France in June 1944. The Normandy landings comprised an invasion force of 156,000 soldiers on D-Day, landing across a 50-mile assault front. Normandy planners had 15 months to prepare for battle. With a stable, experienced, and properly empowered planning team in place, were able to assemble their invasion force from a home base and then faced a short sea crossing to France from a well-defended shore. In addition, the Allied commanders and their troops were available well in advance to prepare both operationally and tactically for the invasion of France. Operation Husky, on the other hand, was just 5 months in the making, with an inexperienced planning team and a dysfunctional organizational structure, was assembled from multiple locations across the Mediterranean, the United States, and Britain, and the Armada had to travel 250 miles of hostile open waters to reach the destination. To complicate matters further, Husky commanders and the majority of their divisions were engaged in the Tunisian War until less than 2 months before the invasion date, leaving them precious little time for rest, training, or tactical preparation. Even so, significant logistical challenges had been overcome so that 176,000 soldiers could be landed on the beaches of southeastern Sicily on July 10, 1943, with 14,000 vehicles, 600 tanks, and 1,800 guns. A combined operations beach landing and beach maintenance exercise of this magnitude had never been attempted before, and yet, over the course of 14 days, a total of 467,000 soldiers would be deployed on the island, equipped with the necessary equipment and stores to prosecute the campaign. 12,556 vehicles were shipped to the island. I have absolutely no wish to take anything away from Normandy and those who will carry out that invasion, but this one gets lost in the shuffle, but it will be the real beginning of the reconquest of Europe. And we shall be there to cover it all week by week, thanks to the mighty efforts of the Time Ghost Army, these newest officers in the army at the vanguard, and Time Ghost Army Member of the Week Oscar Marco nobly supporting our cause. Well, it's what we want to do, right? And to make sure we can do it, join the Time Ghost Army, timeghost.tv or patreon.com. And do not miss Into Context over on our Time Ghost History channel. It is really good stuff. See you next time.